All right. All right. So hello. So at the last Clean Water lecture, my colleague Helen Carr provided an accounting of how clean water funded work has addressed water quality targets. She provided a summary of practices implemented. So for example, acres of riparian buffer planted with trees, phosphorus reduced and the dollars spent. But in today's lecture, I'll discuss how the agency and the partners support installation of those practices and emphasizing that collaboration is key to keeping those projects moving from project idea to implementation. So outside of being implemented, what's the agency definition of a successful project? Well, the Clean Water Funding Policy provides detailed expectations, but in a nutshell, a project is successful if its primary benefit is the reduction of pollutants into our surface waters with a focus on nutrients and sediments. It has a relatively high nutrient reduction for dollars spent ratio for that category of practices. And then in addition to leading to implementation of a practice, there's subsequent maintenance and operation commitments to ensure that the practice performs as expected for the life of the practice. But to make successful clean water projects happen, they require buy-in from multiple agencies, partner organizations, and the public to be able to leverage funding and sustain support through the planning, implementation, and maintenance phases of the project. So the more interesting question today that I'll answer is, well, how does that all work? I'll start with a framework of 3 components. I'll describe the money, the process, and the project implementer or lead. And then I'll describe the partnerships and the roles we all play, and then describe how 5 non-regulatory projects were successfully brought to implementation. So the components. So what's the basic framework of a program that successfully brings a project idea to implementation? Well, it got to have someone to pay for it. You got to have a process that guides development of a project towards the desired outcomes. But also you need an entity to take on the project. So the agency supports the first 2, money and process, but we depend on our partners to apply for funding and carry the project through. So these components of the framework it can be compared to what's needed for a road trip, where the funds are the vehicle, the process is a road, or if more complicated, a map, and the implementer is the driver. And so, in using the analogy and comparing it to this project, both driver and project implementer depend on the first 2 components, the sort of funding and the process, but they also have to figure out how to navigate through the process and avoid those, we can call them bumps along the road. So in doing so, the project implementer often needs outside resources or other partners to complete the project. So going through the components then, money, we've got that. We've got the Clean Water Fund, and then Act 76 actually ensures that it's a dependable source for next phase of a project. But when it's not enough, the project lead, which I'll call the implementer now, they need to use the award to actually leverage additional funds. But that is happening and has happened. In the accounting, we were able to show that the clean water funds have actually leveraged 50% of its value from other funding sources to add to projects. So that's $1.75 million leveraged since the beginning. So the process. So in order to ensure funds are spent responsibly, the agency provides the project lead with a roadmap. We provide guidance for developing a successful project by identifying the criteria that a project must meet to obtain the funds to advance through the stages that are identified in this slide. So in describing the stages, I'll start that the criteria and then the criteria that a project lead will take the project idea through. You start with assessment, so of an area known to have high pollutant loading. So you identify the projects, meaning sources of pollution, followed by identifying the best projects and prioritization based on ability to meet the clean water funding goals. And the planning includes determining the feasibility of a project idea. Then once that looks okay, then you head into design, and from there, grab the shovel, it's time to implement. So I talked about project development criteria. So here's the list, and I referred to them in the previous slide, and it's the project lead will address these as the project moves through the project development stages. They include that the project reduce nutrients and sediment. It needs to be the right project for the right place. It doesn't compromise the function of the natural resources. It's cost-effective projects that will have a high phosphorus to dollar that compares to a standardized cost that the agency has calculated for a project type. And then to ensure that it can be implemented and maintained, you've got needed to show that there's landowner agreement, that all permits are in place, and a responsible party is identified to take on the maintenance. So the agency provides resources to assist the project lead in addressing, but most leads work with other partners to ensure they can address all of those. So one area where the agency provides additional resources is for the assessments, that first stage. We provide templates for identifying problem sites and solutions, and we've got assessments that cover rivers, lakes, and developed areas, including roads. So with projects prioritized based on potential for meeting the clean water goals through these assessments, it assists the project leads by helping them pick a project idea that is probably already pretty close to meeting a group of the criteria. All right, let's talk more about the project implementer, who I'm calling the lead now because that's what they are. They are the active party, but they play a role of coordinator because they're working most likely with other entities to ensure that they've got all the necessary resources and the assistance, and it's to be able to address the criteria that I identified previously. So these hexagons around the project lead identify those potential resource needs. And as I described, funders process is something the agency assists with, and I'll add the permitting support, they assist with that as well. And that can be required even with non-regulatory projects. But our support here ensures, and our support here with the permitting ensures that the project augments and it doesn't compromise water quality protection function of any adjacent natural resources. So then the other hexagons, they include technical support, which is anything from additional assistance for permitting to design to implementation. And then community connection, which is essential for ensuring that we're going to get a landowner and we're going to get someone to help support maintenance of the project. Community connections, groups that know what the landowner might need, understands their concerns, and then helps to address. The project manager I put outside as well because often the project is complicated and they'll hire a contractor, an engineering firm to assist with that. So again, needing other partners to complete the work. All right, so let's go through the projects now. So I'll describe them from the project implementer's point of view, or as much as I can. I've spoken with many of them to try to get the project described well, or somebody on the team. And they cover the developed lands, rivers, forestry roads, and lakeshore sectors. So they are non-regulatory, meaning that their implementation does not meet a permit requirement, but that doesn't mean that they might not need a permit. I'll go through the process for each project, from project idea to implementation. And then also describe how the project lead worked with the agency and partners to address criteria, and thereby successfully meeting the agency's goal for the clean water funded project. All right, first project. Developed land stormwater management. This is a project where the Caledonia Natural Resource Conservation District, NRCD, led the project in Hardwick to restore and stabilize a ditch channel that was receiving stormwater, sediment, and other urban pollutants from a state road, as well as a business, the Buffalo Storage. So the final project then trapped sediment that can be cleaned out, included a rock-lined ditch that won't erode and add additional sediment. So it cleaned up a pollution source that would otherwise have drained directly to Cooper Brook and a Lamoille River tributary. So now I'll describe how the NRCD brought the project from idea to implementation. First, it was necessary to find the partners or work with partners. So here is a list: Community Connection. They were community connection in themselves, but they were able to connect but the town in turn was able to encourage landowner interest once their assistance was gained. Then there was VTrans, an engineer, DEC water planner, Daniel Ozarski, that helped with technical assistance. And then financial assistance was, I think, mostly the Clean Water Fund. So now I'll describe how the NRCD carried the project through to implementation. So first step in the process, the NRCD led the development of the Hardwick Stormwater Master Plan that identified the project. So DEC supported the development of that assessment by providing the template and funding to hire the engineer. But and the NRCD involved the town in this assessment, which then led to their interest in providing additional assistance through to maintenance in this project. And they were also helpful in ensuring that other projects were implemented as well. So the project was identified in the plan as a top priority with high pollutant reductions. Now, coordinating with the other partners, they need to develop the project idea from Stormwater Master Plan to implementation. They hired a consulting engineer to develop design, which was those designs to some degree are work off the Vermont Stormwater Manual. And then in having to consider the landowner interest, they were able to build trust with the landowner. Carrie O'Brien, who was a conservation district manager at that point, was able to do that through her previous connections. And then the private landowner who owned the storage units in the ditch was understood to be concerned with the fact that they were constantly filling up and dumping with sediment, and aesthetics was not something that they appreciated. So they were able to be brought in. And then the VTrans, who had one point, I guess, was supposed to be maintaining the ditch, also was very interested in the project. And so they were agreeable to the project. And then NRCD just had to work with them to ensure that their regulations for working in the right-of-way were met. And so with everybody improving and benefiting from it, it became a project that could be designed and implemented. And then in the end, the town agreed to maintain it. All right, so the next project is the town forest road BMPs, or best management practices, in the Lamoille River in Westford. So in this project, it's the Westford Town Commission who led at least the initiation of the project, and then brought in our other partners came in to assist. So they addressed the erosion off of some historic logging roads and farm roads on a newly acquired parcel, town forest parcel of Maple Shade. And that the resulting improvements included installation of forest road practices to manage the stormwater runoff that led to reduction of sediment loading to the Lamoille River. The Town Land Management Committee as lead, they collaborated with these partners then. They had their connection to their community, so that was great. The Conservation Commission and Trails Committee were both involved. And then technical assistance, most of it was provided by the Department of Forest, Parks and Rec County Forester, Ethan Tapper, who then brought in the Vermont Youth Conservation Corps, and the Vermont Land Trust also had some requirements that helped lead to the project. And then Clean Water Fund was most part the financial assistance outside of people's personal involvement in land. So how did they identify the project? Well, it was already known that the forest had an extensive network of historic logging roads and farm roads that were eroding and contributing to an eroding gully as well. And these were going to become the town trails. So the assessment was the first step in helping the town to prioritize this work. So the town forest, because it had a Vermont Land Trust conservation easement, it was required to have a forest management plan. So Ethan Tapper, the forester, worked with the town and steering committee to create that plan. So from there, the plan identified what needed to be done, and it helped involving the town commissions in the development of the plan and helped to ensure that there was going to be follow through. And these are different assessments than others that we identified earlier, because it doesn't identify specific projects, but these will identify a focus that the landowner should take. So next steps. So once they have a focus, the town forester then helped design the forest road practices and then VYCC is always often Vermont Youth Conservation Corps, a group that has some skills themselves in trail design. So they were able to assist and also help. They were the ones that implemented the project. So the town committee then was able to establish as well is that the community supported the town's work because they provided the results of a survey that had identified interests in protecting wildlife habitat and recreational opportunity. And that's important just to basically give the town that support for continuing to do the work, implement the project, or help with the project. And in this case, after the VYC installed the stone and earth and water bars, turnouts and ditchings on the old logging roads, stabilized the gully, the town was responsible for actually maintaining the trails. And the Conservation Commission is taking on that responsibility by including a link on their website that allows people to identify and let them know about erosion. All right, next one. So this is Floodplain Restoration Project, and led by the Lewis Creek Association. And this project reconnected Beecher Hill Brook, which is a tribute to La Platte, to 1.3 acres of floodplain, as well as reforesting the area. So the Lewis Creek Association's efforts also led to the town eliminating in-stream gravel removal. And as a result, the brook and its receiving stream, the La Platte, they're better able to work towards meeting equilibrium conditions, where it will then reduce sediment loading to the river and also provide more protection to the town from flooding. And the town is downstream of this. So they were the lead, but they collaborated with other partners to ensure that successful partner. So Hinesburg, as a landowner, was brought to the table by this group, and they had the LCA had the time and patience to make sure that the town was committed to the project. And then technical assistance, we have the DEC Rivers program, and then the consulting engineer, and then financial assistance, the Clean Water Fund again, and the town providing some assistance as well as Chittenden County Solid Waste District. All right, so the assessment, how do you get to the first step of what to do? Earlier, they had coordinated a study following DEC templates, and then with agency funding that identified Beecher Hill Brook as being disconnected from the floodplain by management practices at the town garage property. So this stream corridor plan then identified this specific project as a need and a high priority because, and basically, so the LCA decided in 2007, when it was first released, that it was going to be a project they were going to prioritize. So the second step, design. So you got to developing the town's interest as a landowner as part of design. So they'll participate in the project as a landowner, and then also meeting the DEC River program needs, because you are working in a river and there are regulatory sideboards there. So they brought the assessment information about flooding risks and benefits of the proposed project to the select board, and it took a bit, but they ultimately led with additional meetings to the decision by the select board to relocate the garage because they saw the flooding or the potential for flooding damage, along with the Chittenden County Solid Waste Drop-Off Center. But then it took additional time and continued presence of LCA at select board meetings before they finally agreed to include floodplain restoration as part of the garage removal project. So then LCA, then once that was agreement was in place, as the town was proceeding with what they needed to do to remove the garage, LCA then obtained funding to hire a contract to implement the floodplain restoration project and worked with DEC to ensure that incorporated river science. And they were then able to have the town incorporate this work into the final project, which included also that the town was not taking gravel out of the stream at that point, which worked towards equilibrium. And then the town also committed to maintaining the area. All right, fourth project. Now we'll go to shorelines, to lakes. So this is a project on Lake Raponda, and it's an example of how shoreline restoration can be coordinated by a lake association and their partners. The project's led by Lake Raponda. I need Marie here. Included both road work and stabilization of shoreline using bioengineering techniques that resulted in reduction of sediment loading to the lake. And the bioengineering techniques means you're using the trees and shrubs to stabilize an area over the long term. The project also resulted in stormwater management practices that were installed on dirt driveways and roads, which included this open top culverts by the beach and stabilized culvert headers. The association as lead, they built the connection with the town and shoreline owners so they were able to find willing landowners to participate in project implementation. And then they received technical assistance from Vermont Youth Conservation Corps, DEC Lakes and Ponds, DEC Watershed Planning, Marie Caduto, and was a planner, and Amy Peacock helped with from Lakes and Ponds. And then the financial assistance, they had two different types of Clean Water Fund grants, one that goes through VTrans for erosion inventory, and then the Clean Water Fund that funded the work crew. So the assessment, first step, where are the problems? How did these projects come to be? They did both lake-wise assessments as well as a road erosion inventory that used DEC templates and clean water funding. So the association worked with Amy Peacock of Lakes and Ponds and to offer and provide lake-wise assessments to shoreland owners, where they then identified projects to better manage stormwater runoff to reduce erosions. They were able to look at 17 sites. Then the association, along with other partners like Marie and NRCD, helped the town's road crew foreman access funds for a road erosion inventory to further identify problem areas and solutions on town roads. So as a result of all those assessments, excuse me, drink water here. You had a shoreline bioengineering project identified adjacent to a town road, and then in addition, stormwater management practices on dirt roads around the lake. In this project, there was actually another step of actually providing training so that the Vermont Youth Conservation Corps could learn the technique, and Amy Peacock arranged for that, as this is a new practice. Lakeshore restoration. We know what we want to do. How did it actually happen? So the association with partners were able to obtain landowner interest through use of Lake-Wise program, which awards shoreline owners for good shoreline stewardship practices. So it's a reward system. They obtained the town road foreman interest in participating in the road erosion inventory and agreeing to the resulting bioengineered shoreline project. And they used the Lake-wise program designs developed by DC Lakes and Ponds to ensure that the projects would be designed to successfully reduce the sediment and as well as enhance habitat to meet landowners' interests. And then finally, working with DEC to ensure state regs were addressed. The implementation was achieved through hiring a VYCC, the Vermont Youth Conservation Corps. And after they were trained, they were the perfect contractor here. And then the final and last step in the process was successfully obtaining the town commitment to maintain the work adjacent to those town roads. And of course, as they were brought in early on, that was something that was easily done, hopefully easily done. Fifth project. So this is the last overview of a complete overview of a project. And this one is associated with river corridor protection and riparian planting, since it happened in the upper Missisquoi River in Lowell, Vermont. So this project was led by the Vermont Land Trust. And they worked with organic dairy farmers adjacent in Ashley Randall to protect a 37-acre river corridor with over a mile of frontage on the Missisquoi. The farmers also worked with the Missisquoi River Basin Association to plant 621 native trees and shrubs to reforest the banks and the corridor itself. The river conservation allows for the natural movement of Missisquoi towards a less erosive condition and increased connectivity to the floodplain. It's a passive practice. And so Vermont Land Trust leads, but they're collaborating with others. Community connection, they already have a connection with that community, the farming community in the Missisquoi, but they also brought in the Missisquoi River Basin Association that can provide that as well. Technical assistance was the DC Rivers program. Stacy Pomeroy is the river scientist who helps out in this area. And then Clean Water Fund, but also Vermont Land Trust supported their initial assessment. All right, so how did they find the project? So first, they knew the area to go to because a DEC-supported river corridor plan for the upper Missisquoi prioritized river corridor easements as a way to allow the stream to move towards a less erosive condition in this area. With the VLT then focusing their areas in the upper Missisquoi, they then assessed agricultural parcels as meeting the criteria for river corridor easements, but also looked to see where a landowner might be interested. As a result, they then were able to ensure or have the Randalls agree to consider the river conservation easement, which is really the first stage in the assessment, is finding a landowner who's willing to consider it and talk more about what it would take. Then on to the next phase, design, implementation. So to continue, which includes continuing work with the landowner, so to ensure their needs are met and addressed, and also working with Stacy, the DEC river scientist. So working with Stacy first, they had to establish the river corridor width to conserve based on our river corridor mapping work. And then Stacy then provided the estimated compensation that could be provided to the landowner. Then VLT brings that to the landowner to determine if compensation is going to address their concern that they're basically losing economic or their productivity on their agricultural land. And can't say I was definitely not there, but I know that there was an addition of tree planting to their specification, landowner specification. And with that, the deal was sealed. So VLT then, their partner to work with buffer plantings is the Missisquoi River Basin Association. It's work they do a lot and often. And so they handed it over to them. They then, MRBA, met with the farmer to make sure that they were choosing tree species that were going to address their interests as hunters and foragers. They then planted, and project's done. And that last part, the planting, was also supported by the Clean Water Fund. All right, so this last one, I'm not going to provide a detailed description, just a high-level description. These dam removal projects require a project lead to follow a complicated process that requires coordinating with a lot of partners to ensure that resources are obtained. And this project is a great example of how a watershed group with 2 paid staff can pull off such a large project because of the collaboration that exists among Vermont partners. So they led this is where the Friends of the Missisquoi River led a removal of a dam on Camp Wihakawi land. And the majority of the financial aid and the technical resources came from just 6 main partners that you can, that who are listed here. And the dam task force is actually a collaborative effort in itself. Most of these people entities are part of that task force. They meet, they talk, they help each other enhance or improve the process. And then, of course, other stakeholders, including the landowners, 5 contractors. It's a mega project, but they did it. It took them from 2016 to 2021, but it happened. All right, so supporting the collaborative process, it happens at the ground level. I mean, a lot happens all over the agency, but there's a lot that happens, people with staff and organizations, including the watershed planner like myself and the others in the state, state field and permitting staff from the Agency of Natural Resources and Agency of Ag and VTrans. And then for the partners, we have the watershed groups that are represented by the Watershed United of Vermont. You've got the Natural Resource Conservation Districts, and then the regional planning commissions. You know, collaboration just doesn't happen. It needs trust, it needs familiarity with other partners and experience. And I think Vermont's really gotten it right. I don't know why specifically, because of a study that might provide an answer, but I guess that in addition to the small population, our small state, watershed planning that we do by basin, the financial support for regional partners and partner participation in tactical basin planning processes and other state led processes and planning processes, as well as the project implementation that we support, that we've supported the components that support collaboration. And then in addition, we're always looking to improve the process. And one example is the tactical basin planning process, where partners are brought together to discuss what's needed, what's next. So I guess I'll end with, well, what's your role? And if you want to, I would encourage anybody to become part of a group that we partner with. You can join it, you can seek a position on the board, or just keep abreast of what's happening. We now have clean water service providers, which is a whole nother topic, another lecture. And they'll be a group that can also will represent the community's interests. Do you have a project idea? You know, not all projects come from assessments. You can use our resources to understand how it might become a project. You can send it to your basin's watershed planner or a partner. And the easiest way to sort of get information about this is actually to maybe look at we've got a clean water portal that you can Google. So DC, Vermont Clean Water Portal. You ought to be able to, and I think maybe somebody put it in the chat to search for tools that are going to help you with project planning. The tactical basin plans are also very valuable. Actually, I shouldn't say also, they are very valuable as I write them, and my colleagues as well. So if you want to know more about tactical basin plans, you can look for them on our, I'm thinking, oh no, I didn't provide a link, but maybe somebody else can. So in each of those tactical basin plans, we're going to give you a comprehensive understanding of what types of projects we support, where they're going to be important, and in addition, who the partners are that might be able to. Thanks. We've got the link in the chat. And And we also have listed the regional partners. So who would people be working with to, you know, develop a river corridor easement? And we're all hoping that that will be useful. All right, I think I've ended now and given you a couple minutes to talk. Feel free to contact me and or one of my Basin Planner colleagues, and we're happy to talk with you about a project, the concept, condition of surface waters, anything else.
Thank you, Karen. That was a great presentation. We had one question in the chat from Ken asking you to explain the difference between regulatory and non-regulatory process and projects.
So we differentiate between projects that would help an entity meet a regulatory commitment, a requirement. So for example, if a town needs to, and they need to meet a municipal road general permit, and if the work would lead to them being able to say, yes, I've done work to meet that permit, then it can't be allowed. If it's work that might be in addition to what the permit would require, we would consider that more non-regulatory, but that's definitely something to ask a planner about.
It looks like we have another question from Dean talking about how the process could be modified or will be modified once QISPs roll in, and how the process will change, especially for Lake Champlain and Lake Memphremagog. Dean, if I'm not saying your question right, you're welcome to unmute and ask it in your.
I get it. I definitely get
it.
Thanks, Dean. You know, I was trying to figure out how much to say, and as you see, I took my time, more than what I was really allotted for the talk. And so I did mention clean water service providers, so I did mention them, but that's a whole new lecture. That is the next step, and I will let another lecture take care of really explaining that that's going to happen and how it's going to be important.
There's also a question about climate change adaptation projects. Are there any right now, or will they be implemented soon?
So if you, in reading the tactical basin plans, that would provide the reader with an understanding of how our projects, the projects that are in the plan, would address climate change by providing or creating maybe more resiliency. That's probably the focus right now in our plans. We're still developing sort of that section of the plan to understand how our projects can be directed to address resiliency and reduce carbon in the atmosphere. But we definitely see and understand that currently the projects will help out, and in reading the basin plan, you can understand that as well.
Great. Well, it looks like we're at time here, 12:45. Thanks everyone for coming. We'll be putting a feedback form in the chat that if you could please fill that out, that would be great. And don't forget to subscribe to the Clean Water Initiative newsletter to hear more about our lectures. Thank you, Karen.